You've discovered the Technoprogressive Hub. Join us to fight for a high-tech and radically democratic future. Today we're talking with George Dvorsky. George is a very old friend of me and the IET. He was a co-founder of the IET back in the day. We served on the board of directors of the World Transhumanist Association together. And then he got sucked up by the media sphere and started to work for Gizmodo and IO9 and that whole media empire. And now he's the senior editor of science at Gizmodo. And we're going to talk about a number of things, but some of the topics that George and I have worked on together over the years included the non-human issue, the issue of non-human personhood. And we actually did a conference together on that at Yale back in 2012. Seems like a long time ago now, but those topics are still kicking around. And we were trying to get, at that conference, it was fun. We were trying to get the animal rights people to talk to the robot rights people. And that's finally beginning to happen, the robot rights people and the animal rights people. So at any rate, welcome, George.
Hey, thank you for having me. Great to talk to you again.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy that we're going to do this with the board first, the kind of what is techno-progressivism and what is the world situation. I'm going to work my way out in concentric circles, do the fellows
Sure.
and everybody like that. But you and I have been such longtime collaborators that I'm anxious to hear your current thoughts about all of this. You're a Canadian, and the United States has either ripped its mask off, depending on how you look at our history, or suddenly morphed into an imperialist monster and saying terrible things about our nicest of all neighbors, Canadians. And so I apologize on behalf of all Americans, but it has, of course, changed the tenor of the relationship between the two countries. And the effect on Canadian politics is something I'm very interested in that you can tell us about. Mark Carney has been hugely benefited by the attacks of Trump on him, and he's a liberal. And I have always been more sympathetic with the NDP, the New Democratic Party, but I think their vote got halved in the last election or something like that. They've been on a steady decline, along with a lot of the other social democratic parties around the world. So, how does it look from Canada? What's the current Liberal
Yeah.
NDP reform?
Yeah. Again, everything.
Albertan independence. We're trying to get Alberta.
So everything you're saying is true. Needless to say, the second Trump administration has landed like a bombshell in terms of the changes in terms of the Canadian-U.S. relations and the threats to our sovereignty, the rhetoric having to do with the 51st state. While many found those kinds of remarks amusing, we certainly didn't feel that way here in Canada. Definitely, the elbows up kind of mentality came up, and the political repercussions of that, plus the sweeping tariffs, is something that we will feel here in Canada now for not just for months or years to come, but potentially for decades to come. And what it has really done, if just taking a big step back and reflecting on Carney's speech at Davos, is and basically the mentality is never again will we allow ourselves to be so beholden to a single nation. Even if that nation is our closest partner, or, our best friend, it's just we just cannot be beholden to such a significant degree to one trading partner. So, and the thing is, a lot of Canadians, and the tendency is, well, Trump's going to come and go. So let's hold our horses. Let's not overreact. And I think Carney, and perhaps to his credit, is taking the long view on this, realizing that yes, we may not see another, a Trump administration in 4 years, um, but that doesn't mean necessarily that the incoming government will radically change its ways. This could be the new normal, let's say. But I
God,
do
I hope not.
believe, I do believe that the template that's being set here, the patterns that are being set here, will likely, ripple for years to come, and that there will be other Trumps. I guarantee it. I mean, Trumpism, I'm afraid to say, is in for probably for the rest of our living memory, or not memory, sorry, the rest of our lives rather. So I think he's right to kind of, protect us that way. There are some problems though that are immediately emerging as a result of the processes and the steps required to make this happen. So yes, you mentioned correctly that Carney, who was largely elected I mean, he pummeled, sorry, he like rocketed to the top of Canadian politics as a result of these threats from the United States. I mean, many had not even heard of Mark Carney in the months leading up to the election. And the heir apparent to the prime minister's office was going to be Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party. And there was this massive retreat, both from the left and from the right to the center, to kind of to prop up this seemingly sensible politician, this economic, nerd who, dressed nicely, looked the academic type, and had a calm demeanor about him, was going to set it all straight, and that's largely, kind of what happened. But now the pedal is, to the metal, and he's making it happen. He was in India a couple of days ago. He's in Australia today. As you know, before the Davos speech, or either around the time of the Davos speech, he was in China, forging deals with what China has been nothing but nasty to Canada over the last several years. And and
Because of
then
Huawei, right? You
yes,
arrested the Huawei
yeah.
princess.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
they meddle in our elections even. They plant, I guess agents, for lack of a better term, and try to manipulate things here. And there's other things.
And you
And
have
we
a
also
lot
have
of Chinese immigrants
tons.
in
Yeah,
Canada,
tons. Yeah.
disproportionate compared to the United States, and they own a lot of
Yeah.
property there. So it's a pretty
Yeah.
significant factor.
That's right. And in terms of trade tensions, we have massive tariffs on their vehicles to the point where they cannot send them here. And we likewise don't. They tariff our agriculture, which is something that we could really, our Saskatchewan in particular, could stand to send a lot of the agriculture products out there. So
So Carney's move to create a new world
yeah,
order with middle countries, which
that's
includes
right.
India and China, um, it's not an attempt to say, oh, we trust China more or India more than the United States. It's just that we're going to start treating the United States like we treat every other country.
Pretty much,
Yeah.
it's ultra pragmatist, and I think what's the world is waking up and Canada's waking up to the fact that he's not really a centrist politician. He's very much a right-wing conservative. And he's again disregarding human rights issues stemming from China and their threats to us. For example, the Indian government has targeted Sikhs here in Canada, literally assassinated them. And this is very upsetting to Canadians to see to see again, just to see that there is no regard for that we're just doing, this what needs to be done, so to speak, from an economic standpoint, from a survival standpoint. And again, one can make a strong case that he's doing what needs to be done, but my point being is that the so-called Liberal Party seems to be anything but right now, as a result of what Carney is doing to it, which of course I know eventually you did mention that you wanted to speak about the NDP being perhaps a favorite of yours, and they're going through it right now, and they lost a ton of voters in the last election, and many of them obviously went to vote for Liberal instead of NDP. Similarly, many who would have traditionally voted for NDP voted for the Bloc Québécois in Quebec. The Bloc Québécois, even though they're a separatist party, their politics are actually quite left-leaning and very socialist-minded. And if you're in Quebec, you might have asked yourself, well, why am I going to vote NDP for what they seem to be incoherent right now? Whereas, maybe the Bloc Québécois, they do seem to have more of a identity based. They make more sense for someone in Quebec to vote for them. So that's why the Bloc Québécois has done very well. And likewise, many voters who would have voted for NDP, and this kind of this paradox of left wing socialism versus conservatism, is that many people who rightfully belong on the left, workers' parties minded individuals, they, when times get tough, often retreat to the right and to right-wing politics. And this has happened here as well. So strangely and perhaps paradoxically enough, rather than losing these voters to the liberals, the NDP have lost these voters to the Pierre Poilievre conservatives. So what happened during the last election was an
Just can we take
yeah.
a? I mean, is it the same pattern that we see in other places where it's blue collar men, especially, who retreat from supporting social democratic parties and go to the right, and educated women maybe left there in the
You
left
are
coalition?
absolutely correct. That
Yeah.
pattern, and I know what you're saying. I've seen that pattern elsewhere, and it's definitely the case here. Men, and particularly young men, are being drawn to, again, this is where Pierre Polyev comes in. And he, for example, he's struggling right now to get a lot of, I guess, support in Canada, mostly because people aren't sure where he stands in terms of his stance on Trump. So, for example, there was a leadership review a few months ago here, and he didn't mention Trump once in any of his speeches, in any of his comments, almost as if he's afraid to bring him up. And only recently, after the the Carney Davos speech, is he finally maybe getting the message that he needs to confront this head on. And he finally did. He gave us probably one of the better speeches of his career a couple of days ago, where he did talk about the kind of threat that Trump poses to Canada, the kind of relations that he wishes to have, the kind of needing to move on in a similar way that Carney does. So it was kind of interesting that way. So yes, so yes, but young men in particular are still drawn to this Polyev style politics. It is this kind of like new populist, right wing, even Trump style politics, like and particularly in Alberta. And for the first time, I think in our Confederation history, we are dealing with not one but two separatist movements. We're at risk of losing both Quebec and Alberta. The separatist movement in Quebec is a little bit calm right now. It's not like it used to be in the early 90s. There's
And
no
they don't
imminent.
want to join the states.
They most certainly don't want to join the states, and that's a very good point, Jay, because conversely, Alberta, where now suddenly we have one of the most vibrant separatist, I guess, movements that I can ever remember, they actually are having open discussions as to not just separating from Canada, but whether they might actually want to have, this kind of more intimate, partnership with the United States. I'm not sure. I mean, many of them are still probably, proud Albertans and would not want to, let's say, lose that identity and join and be subsumed by the states. But one never knows. These are very, again, like Trumpian, style conservatives. So I wouldn't, throw it past them. But on the positive side of things, the polling suggests it's not anywhere. Again, I can't believe I'm saying this, but still, it's like double digit support for separatism in Alberta, and even whether like 18-20% type stuff, which I wouldn't have believed it had I not seen the stats. But that's what it is. Still, it's clearly far from that 50% mandate that's required. But their premier, Danielle Smith, who basically is doing her damnedest to bring this about and to make this happen and to make this direct democracy happen, they probably will have a referendum on the matter, probably sooner rather than later. And
Is this
she's
partly driven by tensions around federalism? Like, do Albertans feel
big
like
time,
they
big
contribute
time,
more than they get back?
big time. It's a wannabe petrol state. They have not gotten the memo yet, Jay, about the future of gas and oil. And I'm not sure if they ever will, until perhaps Alberta, falls into, economic destitution when, decades from now, we will have largely moved away from the fossil fuel, model of driving, of propping up economies. But they refuse to believe it, and they feel that, yeah, to your point, they feel that they're propping up, Canada, with their rich reserves of natural resources. They're also very
Shale
frustrated.
oil? Are they a shale oil place? What are the
Yeah, that's
natural
like, yeah, the,
resources?
the dirty oil, like the tar
Yeah,
sands, all that. Yeah, very
right.
difficult to get out for sure. But there's also frustration with the building of pipelines, so that a lot of other provinces in British Columbia, in particular, are throwing up the roadblocks, not allowing pipelines to go through the province and then to the coast. So there are all these tensions, and Carney's actually done more, I think, certainly more than Justin Trudeau did, to try to ease some of these tensions. And there have been a number of, by the way, there's been a number of floor crossings from the Conservatives to the Liberals over the last several months. I think two, if not three, of Conservatives moving to the Liberal Party. So being disillusioned by whether it be Danielle Smith style Alberta politics or the Pierre Poilievre style of politicking. So that's been an interesting thing to see as well. So, where does, let's say, the NDP fit into all of this? Well, that's a good question. So during that last election, yeah, they got decimated. They just it was the worst result in their history. They have just 7 seats now in the House of Commons. I think the popular vote was like 6.7%, something like that, which is like so bad. And they actually lost official party status as a result. That affects things like their political standing, certainly from the stature point of view, but also from a funding point of view. And they're on life support right now. And their leader, the previous leader Jagmeet Singh, who resigned. So there's now a leadership race for the NDP party, and that's going to come to a head, I believe, in about a month. And there's 5 candidates right now running for the leadership of the NDP party, and they all kind of are bringing something different to the table. And those differences, while interesting, we can break them down and discuss them, but it's causing some concern both from people outside and inside the NDP that there's a lack of kind of like a consensus on what the NDP should be now and how it should move forward. Even I myself, I've voted NDP many times. I'm not even sure where they should go or what they should stand for right now. So, for example, let's take Rob Ashton. So he's one of the leading candidates right now. This is a back to roots kind of a guy. He's like workers' party, right? That blue collar party. He wants to, talk about organized labor and how he wants to take the blue collar folks that have suddenly decided to vote conservative back and bring them back to the NDP party. He's anti-AI, and that's a big part of his platform. And by the way, he did himself a major embarrassment the other day by issuing a statement about how opposed he is to AI and was caught using, I think it was Chat GPT to generate his response. So
Uh-oh.
again, just these missteps are just like, oh my God. He would like to see bigger taxes on CEOs for having excessive salaries, for example, higher taxes on corporate income, personal wealth, capital gains, that sort of thing. So that's Rob Ashton. One of the more
Just
interesting,
let's
yeah,
pause there for a second, because one of the things that we've been talking about in the Technoprogressive committee that we've got, we is the growing anti-data center backlash.
yeah.
And I think some of us, Ellie in particular, is anxious that this kind of uncritical anti-AI attitude that the left has adopted as a part of the kind of tech lash and the anti-billionaire tech backlash, that's going to make it very difficult for techno-progressives to make the argument for positive liberatory uses of AI. Do you see that happening in Canadian politics as well, or is
Yeah,
it
I
just
do. I
marginal in
mean,
the NDP?
yeah, I mean, well, let me put it this way. I feel there's a tension there that needs to be resolved, and the conversation has to happen. And I don't think that the techno-progressive lens is really weak in Canada, and that the left it can unfortunately drift more towards that kind of like anti-tech or anti-high tech, anti-AI, anti-robotics
Mm-hmm.
lens, which is not great. And I wish it was. I wish it would become a greater part of the conversation. Like obviously, as techno progresses, we talk about these as being enabling technologies. About how can they alleviate disability? How can we talk about accessibility? And obviously, universal healthcare is such a massive thing in Canada, and it's something that we stand very proud. We're very proud of that. Why are we not discussing, for example, ways in which artificial intelligence or other forms of or biotech in general can actually start to enable even better healthcare in Canada, and because we've got lots of gaps here, there are problems, many problems. I'm not going to pretend that our healthcare system is perfect here. It's not, but yeah, I think that would be incumbent upon the left to start to be more coherent and open to those issues for sure.
I subscribe to all the UBI feeds on the socials, and I see discussion of UBI in the Canadian Parliament. I don't know how widespread it is or how seriously to take it. Is anybody talking about it?
Yeah, so there is one NDP candidate in particular that is talking about it, and that is Tennille Johnson. And I would say, has an outside chance of winning the leadership race. She talks openly about guaranteed livable income, especially for people with disabilities. And what she would like to do is actually enshrine that as a right through legislation. So I don't know if any of the other candidates are as that overt about that, but it's exciting to see that at least somebody's talking about it.
Yeah. The one of
Yeah.
the things that came out of the Carney speech, but also just the general situation, is that there's a discussion of Canada potentially acceding to join the EU. Have you seen that discussion mature?
I remember hearing that. That has not I guess that
Proceeded?
idea might have withered on the vine, so to
Yeah.
speak. And I think after the Davos speech, it is more about partnering with middle powers, and maybe not necessarily, joining political union, to that extent. That maybe there's still a desire for a certain amount of autonomy and, wiggle room within these political and economic unions. I mean, uh, or in the early days of the Trump tensions, Carney went so far as to say that we're again maybe because of the experience he has working at the central bank in Britain, was basically saying that Europe is a more natural ally to Canada than the United States, which I thought was a pretty funny comment to make, but also pretty telling. That we're looking instead of looking to the south as who our natural allies or natural inspirations should be, is like back to the old world, and back to the old continent in terms of looking at that. But yeah, that has not evolved too much. But there is I think the leading candidate, at least I think via polls and certainly the impression I'm getting for the leadership race in the NDP is Avi Lewis, and she's a journalist, filmmaker, and you may be familiar with his wife, who's Naomi Klein.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so he's, I don't want to maybe describe him as like a Mamdani type, but certainly, and that's another whole thing is could the NDP perhaps go in that direction? And because clearly Mamdani has a winning formula, really spoke to New Yorkers in a huge way, and has some interesting ideas. Maybe one could argue that
He's
maybe
got
they're borderline,
66% approval right now.
which is wild,
Yeah.
and maybe you can argue that some of these are untenable and borderline populist, but the fact is he struck a nerve, and in a good way if you're left leaning and if you're socialist minded. So what Lewis has talked about, for example, is he wants to, okay, a huge issue in Canada is well, affordability is an issue everywhere, but the grocery store prices at the grocery store are really bad. And I think we have like only like five companies in total, if that, if I get my numbers right, sort of five grocery chains that dominate about like 80% of the market, and
And
they
how
largely
much is that is
control.
our tariffs?
I couldn't tell you. Of your sorry, in terms of being tariffed by the United States, you're asking?
Yeah, I mean the prices in your grocery stores
Yeah,
going up because
considerable,
you're yeah,
considerable. By the way,
yeah.
just a trip to the grocery store ain't what it used to be, because Canadians have actually insisted that products now have either a made in Canada or a made in USA sticker. So that's very, and it's not hidden. That's like, I could, when I go buy, I'll give you an example. I'll go to the store and I want to buy strawberries. Um, uh, so many of our strawberries do get imported in from the United States, California, for example. If it has that USA sticker, I do tend to avoid it,
Mhm.
because they're tariffed, and also we're also just trying to support local and keep our local economies going. By the way, the whole intra-provincial trade is another thing we could get into, but that's a whole other thing. We Canadians have learned that it's harder to trade interprovincially than it is even to the United States, which is crazy. Yeah. So, anyways, yeah. So Avi Lewis, he's got this
See, that would
idea where
be
he
another
wants.
advantage of joining the EU.
Yeah,
You
no,
could
yeah, no. Well, yeah, that for sure. But it's funny, you do look for these silver linings. Like, yes, we're going through it right now. Our unemployment is ticking up, unfortunately. But there's got to be silver linings, because you've got to look at these problems and find ways to optimize things and fix things that are busted that maybe you've neglected in the past,
mhm.
whether it be healthcare, whether it be interprovincial trade, and so on. But so yeah, so with grocery prices being where they are, Lewis has got this idea where it was kind of like this quasi socialization of groceries. So basically, creating these very specific idea where there would be like 50 warehouses plus local grocery stores across the country, and he's calling it like a public Costco with unionized employees, and would be organized by commercial workers, and the government would, front the upfront costs, and the stores would pay for their lighting and refrigeration and so on. But it would be this kind of like groceries and food on need. And he claims that it would like dramatically reduce the cost of groceries for Canadians. And
That's Mom Donnie at scale right there.
yeah, right. So
Yeah.
exactly, and maybe he took that page exactly from Mamdani's playbook, or maybe he came up with the idea himself. I can't speak to that. He's saying again, he uses these sorts of like he's all so Carney had to had to rise the defense budget because everybody's having to lift their defense budgets right now. But he says that this project he envisions would cost about $300 million, which is like half of 1% of what our defense budget is now. So it's kind of like again speaking to terms speaking to Canadians in terms that they can understand, and trying to create these like he's very like solutions based for the problems that are facing us right now. Housing is also a massive problem in Canada. He's skeptical that the Carney government can do what they're promising on doing, and we're starting to see austerity measures being put into place that undermine some of the election promises that he had. So these are areas in where the NDP might start to gain some traction. So affordability, housing, which is obviously related. I can't speak to Avi Lewis's position statements on things like artificial intelligence. Now I'm curious to know myself. But as you can see, as I'm painting a picture here, there's a bit of an identity crisis as to where the left wants to be right now and how to best attract voters, given that they're like in single digit popularity across Canada right now.
Mm. So, but at least the progressive conservatives, right? Is it still called that?
So the progressive conservatives are dead, and
Yes.
that is a whole story unto itself that I could talk at length to. The Prairie Province conservatives conducted, and I mean this in a literal way, they conducted a coup and took over the Progressive Conservative Party. It was literally Alberta conservatives took over the Progressive Conservative Party and even renamed it the Conservatives. And this was Preston Manning back in the day, and basically destroyed like that Mulroney era style progressive conservatives that was once in place. And in fact, there's a really incredible analogy can be made to what Trump is doing with the Republican Party, that you cannot compare the current Republican Party. And by the way, I've heard this, but only through rumors that MAGA types have actually literally took inspiration and studied what Preston Manning did to overtake the Progressive Conservative Party. And so I'm with my apologies, James. My apologies to your country, that perhaps we modeled for you how a
Well,
fanatic, almost borderline fanatical right wing element can take over another right wing, element.
I think that what passes for tacticians on the part of the American right have been studying everything from Mussolini to the
Yeah.
present. So I don't think any one person gets credit for the fascist
Yeah.
playbook. But yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, what's happening in Canada is it's hard for us to separate as Americans because you're what most 80% of the population lives within 50
Oh
miles of
yeah.
the US border.
Yeah, I think
So
that's true. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, a lot of the it's like an afterthought. It's like Transnistria in Europe, this tiny little strip of land that you forget, oh, that's actually Russia there.
Yeah.
Sticking there in the middle of Europe. But at any rate, I mean, I apologize for what we've done to you again. But in terms of technology regulation, healthcare, you mentioned that the Canadian healthcare system, which in the United States, the American left has always pointed to Canadian healthcare as the model of what we wanted to do, that it is expensive. It's the second most expensive healthcare system in the world. So you have some of the same problems that other healthcare systems have. And of course, what you include and what you don't include is going to be a problem in every healthcare system. But are there reforms coming in Canadian healthcare that is something that
Not,
liberals are pushing?
yeah, not that I'm aware of, and I couldn't tell you why. Part of the problem is a lot of these matters are up to the provinces.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there's going to be like, downlinked funds and all that. And you can have the federal government kind of set a kind of, a model for what it believes the healthcare should be like. But this is largely in the hands of the provinces. Let's take Ontario, for example. where our premier is Doug Ford, a conservative, even borderline on that populist side of conservatism, famously the brother of Rob Ford.
Hmm.
And frustratingly, like he's a businessman first and is business oriented first, and it has really down prioritized healthcare in Ontario. It's extremely frustrating. So, James, it ultimately does come down to the provinces. I don't think there's a coherent vision right now from coast to coast as to how to fix it. But yeah, the problems are
So
some of
the
the
health system gets block grants to the province, and then the province
that's
gets to
right.
decide how to spend it.
That's right. And then the province likewise obviously taxes us and funds of hospitals and the like as well.
Mhm.
So problems that we have here, for example, it's so hard to find a family practitioner now. And it's hard to convince, let's say, somebody to go up way up north, where up into the northern Ontario, where there's sparse population and it snows, for 8 months a year. It's hard to get buy-in on that. And we have many communities, and even inner city communities, it's hard for like many countries around the world. We brought in so many immigrants, over the last several months and years, and we brought in more immigrants, in a way that we were able more than we could even really handle, and we're feeling the stress of that across many different sectors, and healthcare being one of them. So, yeah, having a family doctor is a problem for many people. Secondly, waiting lists are hideously long. My father, for example. He definitely needs an MRI on a certain health issue that he's facing, and he will not be able to get it until I think October. So it's kind of these intolerably long wait lists that frustrate so many Canadians, and that's why while we will not ever I don't think any politician here would survive on trying to advocate for the dismantling of universal healthcare. What you do start to hear are things like the two-tier systems, which if you want to piss off a lot of Canadians, start to talk about two-tier systems, or where basically if you're rich, you can afford to, get healthcare, and if you're poor, well, then you're just gonna have to, deal with the shoddy state of,
Not
healthcare
necessarily
at
in the states,
expense.
right? That's
Yeah,
the usual right wing
yeah.
American complaint is that Canadians just come to the states when they want it, but there's a private healthcare system in Canada as well.
Yeah, but not yeah, you could not compare it to the situation in the States. But
Yeah.
I wish I had more to talk to you about, the state of healthcare in Canada and reforms and impetuses to make it, more progressive. It seems like I couldn't tell you why it's been deprioritized. I think maybe just again we're fixated like what's right in front of our face right now, which is the threat from the United States to our sovereignty. Tariffs on across the board is just absolutely it's really fixated us in terms of our attention, and it's been hard to kind of think outside the box a little bit. And that's another interesting thing. Like, doesn't matter whether you're NDP, conservative, or liberal. It's that this has forced us to perhaps put really important stuff on the back burner, and have to face these imminent threats or these perceived threats coming from the United States. It's
Well, yeah,
unfortunate.
nobody's thinking about climate change at the current
That's
moment.
a good
So,
example. Oh, boy, that's a great example. Yeah,
yeah,
so much for that, right? Oh well, so
yeah.
much for the planet, I guess. Yeah,
I'm glad that China's making all their solar panels, but we're
yeah,
not going to buy them apparently. Well, one of the examples of the problems of all healthcare systems right now is the GLP-1 drugs, which I have been very excited about and have been taking for the last year and have immensely benefited from. And I think I'm probably going to live years longer as a consequence. But they are very expensive still. And there are certain states and health plans in the United States that had been offering them and then started to go bankrupt because so many people started to use them. We've actually seen a decline for the first time in the obesity rate in the United States as a consequence of their widespread use. Like a third of Americans have tried them, and 15% of Americans are on them at this current moment.
yeah,
There's a
yeah.
high recidivism rate where people drop off, but they are still too expensive. And Bernie has proposed, as he has with many other drugs, that we liberalize importing of other countries' drugs to the United States as a way to reduce our costs, because Americans do pay more for these things because we don't have group buying.
Yeah.
We're actually forbidden by Congress to have states have contracts for how much you're going to pay for certain kinds of drugs. Um, But is GLP-1s posing a similar kind of burden on the Canadian healthcare system, even though it's cheaper there?
Yeah. Yeah, it's slightly cheaper here. Recently, Ozempic went off brand, so knocked a few percentage points off the total cost. But ultimately, it's still not covered by the healthcare system. It's still an out-of-pocket expense. And I think this is a really natural, talking point for techno progressives. And this is something that perhaps we at the IEET and abroad can, I think, discuss more forcefully. Everything you're saying is true in terms of the buy-in and how many people are on it. And the studies have shown that for so many health risks and health factors that GLP-1s are doctors saying it's what you need. It will help, alleviate everything from like uh,
Heart
cardiovascular
disease,
disease
cancer,
and yeah,
stroke, alcoholism, pot
yeah,
abuse, sex addiction,
sore knees, James, sore
yeah,
knees.
yeah,
Sore
bad
lower back.
backs.
No, it's actually almost ridiculous. At Gizmodo, we cover GLP-1s almost on a daily basis because it's such a topical thing to discuss. And it's almost this inside joke, like, oh my God, like, is there anything GLP-1s can't do? And every once in a while we try to find a study that shows there's some kind of a side effect or a detrimental thing. And it's like it's so hard to find anything and even if there is a weird side effect, it's super fringy. So,
You'll
yeah.
appreciate this. A couple months ago, I was down at a talk in Florida with Robin Hansen and Zoltan Istvan and
Oh,
some
wow.
other transhumanist dudnik there. And I said, have you noticed that I lost a lot of weight because of GLP-1s? And they said, what are GLP-1s? And I'm like, you have been transhumanist for at least 20 or 30 years. Are you not paying attention? This is the first life extension drug that we've really got. And you should be paying attention and
Wow.
promoting this stuff. But it's like, oh, well, obesity control is not what we were interested in. We wanted to be beautiful and immortal. And, you're just making us less fat.
Oh my God. So this is such a good point. And this again is that sliding scale. You and I have talked about this for 20 years. It's that sliding scale of technology and that, like what is technology or, what we as futurists talk about that a lot of futurists have it incorrect that it's something that's off in the future that doesn't quite exist yet. And it has some kind of like like some super duper look and feel to it is not what you think. So, but when it comes embedded in our reality and it becomes accessible, well, that's not what we're talking about anymore. That's not, I don't really mean it that way.
Move the
And this,
goalpost.
yeah, the moving goalposts. And this is where, again, as techno progresses, we have to be on this and on it huge. And framing it like this, like, yeah, this is life extension, or like this is the, and it's also, yeah, I'm sure you've heard this, is that, oh, it's kind of like cheating. It comes back to that Puritan work ethic or whatever, that no, you have to earn it. You have to like mentally be tough and fight whatever it is that's wrong with you. And the same thing, we heard the same thing about, let's say antidepressants or anti-anxiety meds or whatever it is that if it's a pill or a subcutaneous injection, that somehow it's cheating, it's not right. And we need, again, as voices in support of these technologies in terms of these, medicines or however you want to term it, we absolutely have to be cheerleaders for that. So where I would love to see the conversation drift in Canada, because we have universal health care, is it's got to be covered. This has got to be covered, if not in whole, certainly in part, because the savings, again, especially where you have a country in which the healthcare system is largely propped by taxpayer money. What better way to help taxpayers and perhaps alleviate the burden of paying for the healthcare system to wipe so many medical conditions off the slate, or at least, ease those burdens. And I like your point about framing it as a life extension technology, because yeah, what are those trickle downs once you're in your 70s and 80s in terms of what you're no longer having to deal with and treat in terms of those end of care costs, that are such a big part of a public healthcare system. So that's
We also have to deal with the lingering effects of the campaign against fat phobia, right? That there was a
yeah.
20-year, 30-year discussion of, oh, we can't tell people that fat is unhealthy because that would be negative for their self-image or whatever. And it's like, okay, I understand the motivation. I want everyone to love themselves. I want everyone to be happy with
Yeah.
whatever is happening. But Still true that fat is unhealthy. And if
Yeah.
we could get everybody thinner, it would be lot better.
Yeah, this is a trick. This that now you're getting in that tricky area, fat shaming, fat phobia, and I've even noticed there is a kind of obsession now with skinny in a way that I've not seen in the past. And I think GLP-1s are most certainly responsible for this.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I think being mature about it, and again, the discourse around these issues need to be framed less about this being a cosmetic. Again, it's obviously people want to look skinny and they feel it makes themselves more attractive. That's fine, but I'd much rather that we frame the conversation less around, skinny culture, less around fat shaming, and more around the health benefits that these medicines, that they're incurring.
Right. I think that's the harder nut for the techno-progressive case is that we also want to challenge the border of where people just say, I may not have a clinical reason, I may not have a
Yeah,
diagnosis that you can prescribe this for, but I just want it. Right. And
yeah.
maybe the state doesn't pay for those things, but maybe you get those things through the marketplace, over the counter, something like that.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, is how patients, how regular folks have to fight for their access to this stuff because you still have to go to your doctor. And let's say you're like borderline, maybe overweight, and they're like, I don't know if you need it or no. And I know through people that I know personally that this is a struggle for people that they almost dread having to go to the doctor and once again having to ask for and almost begging them to give them these medications. And I also know of people that because they were denied it through their GPs, they go through these gray market channels to get them. So now you don't have physician oversight. And they were like you injecting themselves with 2 and 3 times the prescribed amounts because they did not know how to use them.
Well,
So
yes,
this is the danger, right?
are the grandchildren of our transhumanism in Silicon Valley. Apparently, the biggest thing in Silicon Valley right now is importing Chinese peptides and just taking boatloads of things that no one knows what they do. But some Chinese guy said, "Oh, if you take this, it'll make your hair grow." It's like, oh, okay, I'll give it a try. But yeah, and it
Yeah.
started because of the legal attempts to lighten up on the regulation of the importing of GLP-1 drugs, which we all want more people to have access to cheap GLP-1s, but then they started to import all the other Chinese peptides that hadn't been approved by the FDA.
Right.
At any rate, yeah,
If I might add, just I don't know if you heard, but RFK Jr. was on Rogan the other day, which he made an announcement that they're looking to take a roughly 2 dozen, 14 or so peptides that are currently on the Category 2 list from the FDA, and basically these are like on the naughty list, if you will, and basically let it go to the Category 1 kind of free for all. Even though many of these, he didn't list any by name, by the way, and basically kind of letting like the free market type, approach to just deciding whether these are safe or not.
caveat
So
emptor.
yeah, so that's look for the FDA to make that announcement in the next couple of weeks. So that's just a recent development.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be a problem for every new um, innovation that we promote as a life extender or an anti-aging therapy. There's going to be clinical prescriptions for it for certain purposes. And then we're going to be making the argument that if a broader swath of people had access to it, it would actually reduce overall healthcare costs and be good
Yeah.
for society. And we're going to be having that fight around all these things, I think.
Yeah. And the other part of the conversation as well is we've only seen this is actually exciting to say because we've only seen the first generation of these weight loss medications. That the Ozempic revolution really kickstarted a lot of research and development in this area,
It's
and
not
we do
done.
know that
Yeah, there's new drugs
we
coming.
oh there's a but super powerful new drugs coming. We've basically this is so great. Like this is just the start. And I suspect that not only will we see greater efficacy with these drugs, but I think we'll start to see prices go down as well. And this will start to become a normalized, I'm hoping now, fingers crossed, a normalized part of, your I guess your, medical ritual or however you want to put it in terms of just maintaining optimal health or at least, being as healthy as you can be. And we all know it just, yeah, your weight has a lot to do with it. So.
Back in the early 2000s, you and I were writing for betterhumans.com.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And one of the articles that I wrote at that time was on futurist parenting. Well, I had two little kids, and They would ask things like, "Are there unicorns?" And I would say, "Not yet. You know, there
Not
might
yet.
be unicorns someday." But the advent of GLP-1 drugs and their dramatic efficacy for me has dramatically improved my credibility with my kids because one of the things I always told them was, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to diet, I'm going to try to lose weight, but I know that there's going to be a fat pill someday, and I'm looking forward to this fat pill. And they were like, "Oh, Dad, you should just exercise and diet." And it's like, now there is a fat pill, and now they believe me that there may be, maybe there will be unicorns next year. We'll see.
By the
So
way, for the listeners who may not know, Better Humans was again the like a webzine that Simon Smith, a transhumanist and friend of mine here in Toronto, we started up in like a 2001, 2002, and I proudly say it was the first explicitly like pro human enhancement, pro like transhumanist e-zine in the world. I mean, we did it for a few years. We had a lot of great thinkers chime in and provide editorials, and we hit the news on a daily basis. But I'm definitely happy you brought that up. I was very proud that we had done that. And in a weird way, not even a weird way, even though I had some hiccups in terms of my career and its trajectory, those early years in the early 2000s of me doing journalism and being the deputy editor for Better Humans, it did set me eventually on course to become obviously an editor well, a writer and a reporter at Iron9 and Gizmodo. Now, of course, the senior editor at the science desk there.
it's just that they're going to, on the algorithm, they're going to suppress
Yeah.
it. And that is so much more invisible and more difficult to confront in our society because we have to know who, we would have to be in the boardroom at X when Musk gives the
Yeah.
order, suppress the algorithm or whatever. And
Yeah.
we don't know what's happening.
Yeah, and boy, so many talking points here. One of the things I'm very proud of, at Gizmodo is that we still, I like, again, don't get me wrong, I'm a big advocate of artificial intelligence, and I think that the potential is obviously, um, through the roof. Although we haven't even discussed, risks and regulation yet, but that's a whole other topic. But in terms of AI, let's say taking over media, to your point, I mean, one thing I'm proud of at Gizmodo is that we still have that human touch, and that we don't use generative AI to produce our content. All of our content has a byline. There's a human being behind it. You can look at their picture and read their bio, and you can follow their work on a near daily basis.
You're not
And one
tempted to
thing
use AI art because those artists must be expensive.
Yeah, well, this actually came up today, believe it or not. There was we covered a study about a quadruple star system, and the art that was supplied to us was a very quickly a Chat GPT generated image. It was lovely, if not bland, and it didn't actually speak at all to the actual dynamics of this particular system. And after consultation with the editor in chief of Gizmodo, we decided to not use it. It was lazy, it was cheap, and it didn't speak to the paper, so we rejected it. By the way, that's very rare for that to happen. So what I did instead was I sourced an image from the European Space Agency. It was a Hubble Space Telescope pic of an actual quadruple star system. It looked quite lovely. It was very striking. It's a real thing, and we used that instead. And we, of course, we captioned it that this is a quadruple star system, but not the one mentioned in the paper. So that we're sensitive to that, and you can understand why. And I also do encourage my writers to be personable, right? Because right now, what's happening is there is a real craving for authenticity. I think that if the readers, when it comes to the news cycle, and whether it be an editorial or breaking news or whatever, they feel that I mean, they want to know there's a human behind the wheel. And that there's something just a bit off-putting about a machine, regurgitating out something that feels that, they should know. And
Do you
so
think that's going to be a boost for like new journalism, like the
big
Hunter
time.
S. Thompson kind of
Big
journalism?
time, big time. craving for authenticity. I've said that phrase now over and over again because I believe it to be true. So I drive this point home with my writers and I say, use the first person pronoun. Talk about me and I. Bring up a life experience.
What
If you're
drugs were
covering
you on?
a study, yeah, talk about it. Like this is how we can make ourselves AI proof, in media. And by the way, I'm also proud to say that we are also brazenly telling the truth and reporting on the news as we see it. We are hard on the Trump administration. We are brutal, on Musk and the like, in terms of their indiscretions. We're not easing up an inch on these matters. And it doesn't matter if it's us at the Science Channel or the Tech Channel that we have there. And look, if they want to shut us down, by the way, I went into the second Trump administration quite pessimistically with the prediction that they were going to shut us down eventually. I'm not sure I want to rescind that prediction because it's early days still. We're only a year into the administration. We see what's happening to talk shows. Like you brought up across the United States, that they're dipping into these archaic laws in terms of, trying to stifle who they cannot speak to. So, and with war now in the Middle East and midterms coming up, like it's just that we've only maybe potentially hit the tip of the iceberg in terms of the state control of media. So only time will tell. But yeah, we're continuing to stay the course and we'll deal with that crap should it ever suddenly be placed in front of us.
By the way, it appears that we're setting a standard for other far right politicians as well. Takaichi in Japan, I see, has introduced
Oh,
legislation to amend Japan's media fairness law, which, like the American media fairness law, said if you judge a network and all of the things that it does, if it doesn't have balance, then the government can step in and say you should be more balanced. Which, of course, ours hasn't done in a long time since we've had Fox. But what the Trumpers want to do is say if you have a particular program that is unbalanced, that is, which means critical of Trump, because obviously all of Fox is unbalanced in support of Trump. But
yeah.
if you have any one program that is critical of Trump, that program is therefore evidence that you are unfairly unbalanced. And Japan wants to do the same thing now. So, I mean, I think those kinds of reinterpretations of existing law are extremely dangerous because then you
Yeah.
can just start shutting down everybody you don't
Yeah.
like.
And what it causes us as editors at Gizmodo, for example, or elsewhere, is you do feel to a certain degree that you're walking on eggshells, because if you should make any mistake, like maybe don't use the word allegedly, or if you misstate, like for example, I think we were threatened with a Trump lawsuit for misstating. Uh, oh yeah, we misstated, I believe, income from Truth Social. And I'm not sure how our legal team deflected that, but the moment we make any kind of a screw up and we're hit with a lawsuit, like NBC, they can afford, to settle out of court or whatever. We most certainly cannot. We're so little,
Didn't they
you
sue the
know.
BBC for $2 billion for
Oh,
editing
yeah.
a speech
Okay.
or something like that?
Yeah, that they missed they edited the speech such that he felt that he was taken out of context and misrepresented, and that was a huge number on that lawsuit. So
Yeah,
likewise, if something were levied at us of that number, it would just essentially would mean we got to pack it up and call it a day, and
yeah.
that would essentially be the end of us. So yeah, I as an editor, I gotta I gotta be very careful about everything that we say. If I have any concern about anything, it goes to we've got a legal team that can take a look at it and give us the thumbs up or ask us to maybe rephrase something. And that way, again, we continue to try to make ourselves, we talk about being AI proof, we got to be Trump proof as well.
You're ad driven as your revenue model.
We are ad driven. We are a click based, revenue. So yeah, we need eyeballs. We need people clicking into our articles, and obviously the balance there is to, report on what you think is newsworthy and important, and not just go for the trends and what you think is, just going to, just bring up the clicks. So that's always the balance when it comes to reporting. We're not because we're not paywalled. Yeah, just and I will add, by the way, you were talking about algorithms and the whole problem, if you will, whether you're on X or whether you're on TikTok, is that you're fed media. Although, um, like Facebook ain't what it used to be, so to speak, in terms of it's being able to give you news. But one thing that we have really love about Gizmodo, and we've had this now for so many years, we have an extraordinary number of people who just come to the site. How about that? So our front page, when you just look at the volume of readers that we get there on a daily basis, it's a huge chunk. In other words, we are not beholden to the social media outlets of the world. Yes, we promote ourselves on Instagram and Blue Sky and all the players, but we're not, dependent on that. We know that people will actually come directly to Gizmodo to read our content, and I love that, and I hope that we're always going to be able to retain that.
Well, I'm a not the usual audience, but I definitely always thought that your content was information crack. I mean, your headlines were like clickbait for me. But the artificial intelligence, we don't have a lot of time, but let's do
Sure,
real quick round on artificial
sure.
intelligence and jobs. I'm sure it's hitting Canadians the same way it's beginning to hit here. New college graduates not being able to find jobs, potential white collar workers feeling like they're not going to get a leg up into entry level skills because AI is going to take those jobs instead. And the whole debate about whether our technological unemployment has arrived or not. And at the same time, we're trying to figure out things like its effect on higher education. That
Yeah.
if all the students are using it to do their homework, they're giving themselves a cognitive deficit. I think that's somewhat overstated. The social media effect, the phone effect, all that's a little bit overstated because a lot of those things started to happen 20, 30 years ago. But there definitely has been some evidence of cognitive offloading affecting people's ability to remember or learn or reason.
Yeah.
So do you think that I mean, we don't want there to be an AI backlash because we want to point people towards the liberatory
Yeah.
possibilities. But at the same time, techno-progressives need to acknowledge and
Big
confront
time.
every problem that AI raises
Correct.
so that we can get there.
Correct. We are an ethics-based organization,
Right.
and we have to be contemplative about this, and there has to be open discourse about it. I likewise am concerned about the cognitive offloading that you describe. The generative AI has certainly introduced us to some issues that we have never encountered in our past. Like we all know, for example, that we've lost, learned history. Like if you and I were plopped in the middle of a tropical rainforest, we would not be able to survive in a way because we've lost that knowledge that our ancestors had to survive day to day. They would consider us to be useless, that we would be so stupid. How could we not even survive, in the forest? But that's different because we still took human brain power and that endowment we have of our intelligence and we just applied it to different things. The concern now, of course, with cognitive offloading is that we've kind of stopped the thinking, even that the critical processes are now being offloaded to an external source as exosomatic thinking processes. And I have no answer for you. I don't know what the repercussion of that. We are treading in uncharted territory, and I don't know what that means in terms of the downstream effects. What I can say, two things: we got to talk about it. We've got to look at what's happening, and we need to. And secondly, we need to start talking about potential prescriptions if we feel it is a problem. And I don't necessarily mean like destroying AI and getting rid of it outright. It's here to stay, as you like to say. Well, you cannot, it's like arguing against the plow. But for example, how do we then how do we, for example, perhaps rethink the education? Like basically because information and those kinds of skills are now being offloaded, what is school now? And maybe school is that there's no tablet and no phone, and it is all about being forced in a way to exercise that muscle, which is critical thinking, in the absence of, let's say, generative AI. So yeah, we are going through it right now, and I think it's very good to be aware of. We need to be aware of this. And again, that's just off the top of my head. Like I don't know what needs to be done, but I do believe that it's a major problem. And my nephews and I talked to other young folks, and boy, they use generative AI like you wouldn't believe, and they feel they're getting away with it. Right, like they like when they're writing an essay, like they're definitely trying to use as much of it as possible to avoid having to work, having to think. And as techno progressives, we can't be in denial that that's happening and that's a problem,
Mhm.
and because we want to think that we're raising another generation of critically thinking individuals who can process information in a productive and responsible way, and we would like to maintain that moving forward. Where again, this is maybe with a bit of I guess hand waving, is that to this point, whether it be advent of books or the internet or whatever, we've always had these massive, earth-shattering, developments when it comes to our information technologies, and we've always seemed to survive it. We always seem to actually do better as a result of it. So again, being hand wavy without any prescription, I'd like to think that actually, yeah, let's not overreact and be reactionary. That we probably will get over this too. I'm sure we will. We just have to figure out how. And this is where you and I come in the IET and our colleagues is to foster these conversations and to find pathways forward.
I think we're both open to regulatory intervention, but I am also very attuned to the fact that young people seem to be recognizing the downsides of some of these things and changing their behavior. Like the use of dating apps is way down. That people did it, they gave it their best shot, and a lot of people decided that it wasn't for them, and that seems to be like a healthy adaptation. It's like
Yeah.
not everybody's still playing with their pet rocks. They
Yeah.
played with pet rocks for a while, then they put them away. But here's one tech policy issue that I'm stuck on these days, which is the Australians adopted an under 16 ban on access to social media. The Brits adopted an age verification for access to porn. A lot of American states are pursuing similar kinds of bans, access to LLMs being age restricted. And while in general, I think I'm fine with the idea that there are certain things I don't want, I'm about to be a grandparent for the first time. And would I want my new grandchild to be raised by an LLM? Obviously not. Would I want them to have their education be crippled by an LLM? No. Would I want them to be preyed upon through social media when they're 12? No, obviously not. But the way that you fix that is by doing identity verification on the internet, which we've never really done before. And identity verification leads immediately to being China, which is that everything that everybody does on the internet can be traced back to them.
Yeah.
And that does not seem to be a positive end state for democracy.
I'm sorry, I'm making myself laugh because I've often thought this whole age verification, because some age verification schemes actually the AIs deduce what they think your age is based on your
Yeah,
browsing habits and stuff. I've
that's
often
right.
thought how hilarious would it be that you're denied your favorite porn site because you have the browsing habits of a 6-year-old.
That's
So
right. Well,
imagine.
Spotify does that at the end of the year. They say your musical age is so and so based on what you've been listening to. And like my daughter got 56 because she'd been listening to some old musicals, and I got
Yeah.
26 because I'd been listening to K-pop Demon Hunters. And so, yeah, I mean, these if
Yeah.
they're going to do that, it's going to be extremely erratic.
It's yeah, but to your point, I've been actually like an ostrich with its head in the ground about a lot of these things that you're talking about. In particular, the Australian rule, for example, about minors not being able to access social media. And I'll admit, I've not kind of thought it through. I'm of because I guess because probably two minds of it. I see why you'd want to do that, but I also feel I don't know that doesn't seem fair. So I it's some I don't know how to even answer that. It's just because like I said, I just see both sides of the argument.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as a final topic before we go, you and I think, both have been reflecting on Francis Fukuyama's End of History. And I'll tell you where I'm reflecting on it, which is that back in the day, Fukuyama was one of our bioconservative interlocutors. He wrote a book critical of transhumanism, said that transhumanism was the most dangerous ideology in the world. But 10 years before he wrote that book, he had written The End of History, arguing that liberal democracy, liberal capitalism, was the final political ideological form, or at least that's what people thought he was saying. He seems to have backtracked since then, that he wasn't saying that was actually the end of history. It was a joke that he was just saying, but it was for now. The collapse of communism had validated liberal capitalism. And the way that I interpreted what he subsequently did with transhumanism was like, oh, well, maybe there are ideologies that will take the place of communism. You know, won't be communism coming back, but there'll be some other ideologies that will be opposed to liberal capitalism, and transhumanism might be that kind of thing. But the reason I've been reflecting on it recently is that now that Trump has blown up the rules-based liberal neoliberal order, which Carney rightly pointed out was always only half true, it was always only half observed, that there should be a universal standard of ethics because Saudi Arabia got away with stuff that Venezuela didn't, and so forth. Um, but now that Trump has blown it up, I really miss it. And I thought after the end of communism that there was going to be this efflorescence of liberal and social democracy all over the world, and that we were on a steady march towards an end of history. And it wasn't going to be Fukuyama's end of history, because I thought it was going to be social democracy that we were going to evolve into, and not liberal capitalism, but social democracy. But now I'm, in the same kind of, oh my God, where are we? If the rules-based order is off the table and we're back to 19th century imperialism, I'm completely unmoored. So what's your reflection on the end of
Yeah, I
history?
love everything that you're saying. It's such a rich topic, and we could even devote an entire podcast to it. But
Yeah.
I keep going. There's a couple things that I keep going back to. One, I've always kind of like I always hated it. I always and maybe because I just fundamentally misunderstood what he was saying with the. I think he wrote it like 1992,
Yeah.
and I felt that it was like brutally and naively presentist. That is, especially as futurists talking about the stuff that we were certainly talking about back then, even still that still I think are warranted today. It just seemed like really implausible to believe that given radical life extension, given a post-scarcity, economic climate, given all the different things that we've talked about, that how could you possibly still say that that liberal capitalism could be like the default or the only, I guess political mode that would be that would be stuck in that in perpetuity just seemed naive. I didn't necessarily have and answers to what the next mode would be, or even multiple modes of political being would be. But I just felt that it was like I said, just a presentist view of almost like of the status quo. At the same time, since 1992, and again, I know Fukuyama did not necessarily say that it didn't mean there wouldn't be any wars, and it didn't mean that there would be historic events happening. It's just that so much has been happening lately. Like I think you and I are reflecting for the same reasons, wondering, what does this actually mean? So one of the things that I keep reflecting back on is the rise of China. And while you describe the fall of communism, I think is only half true because
Mm-hmm.
China is very much this kind of like capitalist communism, which is almost like an oxymoron, but that's what it is. And
The
it
Soviet Union was perceived as an argument for communism, but the China is perceived as an argument for authoritarianism, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, this authoritarian, capitalist-minded communism, like as an old history professor of mine would remind me, the apparatus of terror remains fully intact. And the party is fully, in control of the country.
Move back into the
Sorry.
frame.
Yeah.
I'm putting this
So
up
that
as a video.
I keep
So
reflecting back to that because that is China, I think, and I'm sure you will agree, could not be described as a liberal democracy. So right there and then, it's a bit of an illusion like as Carney suggested, is an illusion to think that the world order had settled around capitalist democracy. Yeah, those are the things that I keep reflecting at, and even of course the rise of neo-fascism. I know I argued many years ago, I think it was in Mountain View, California, for one of our conferences, how I predicted that democracy, the window of democracy was will, if not soon, will eventually start to close, and that it was a brief window in human history, and that the access to extreme technologies, particularly those that pose both catastrophic and existential risks, not to mention technologies that like surveillance technologies, as we're seeing now with like, the problems with open AI and such, that it would give rise to the return of authoritarianism at the expense of democracy. I still stand by that. I still think that and maybe it's not unfolding in the way I necessarily thought. But for all of these reasons, I still feel that Fukuyama's thesis is on shaky ground, and only time is maybe it's not lasting the test of time, at least based on certain interpretations of it.
Well, it's funny because Fukuyama himself has worked pretty hard actually to be on a redemption arc from his neoconservative roots, because he saw the error of his ways vis-a-vis Iraq, and he certainly saw the error of his ways in supporting the Republicans and the right. And more recently, he's been talking like a social. He's still at the American Enterprise Institute, which is still a conservative organization, but he's been talking and self-describing as a social democrat more recently, which I think is fantastic
Wow,
and hilarious.
yeah, wow, okay. Mind blown.
Yeah, but I mean, we should get on the horn again and talk about
Yes.
global order, because I think we've been talking about it in the Technoprogressive committee subcommittee that we've got, about whether that's something we want to put in the Technoprogressive geopolitics and a geopolitical view, put in the Technoprogressive thing. And I think we decided that it was just too complicated to try to figure out a Technoprogressive approach to geopolitics. But mine is basically world federalism. And so what I'm hoping, what I saw when I heard Carney's speech was, okay, this old world order idea was dead, but that we still have a need for a world order, and maybe the next one can be better, and it can be more of a federalist vision, more of a true universal global law kind of vision. And
Yeah,
I was hoping that was what was going to come out of
this
it.
is so.
You seem to be more pessimistic about
this
Carney
is such
than
a tough pill for me to swallow right now because the liberal order is collapsing around us, right?
Yeah.
And particularly like right now, as war is again, maybe I'm being rooted too much in the moment, but with war raging in the Middle East now, Cuba is next, and obviously the tensions with Afghanistan and Pakistan, and it just seems to me we're definitely we've moved so far away now from that bipolar arrangement that kept things stable during the Cold War. This multipolar planet that we're on right now is so chaotic and is leading to so many. They're just, of course, Russia and Ukraine. It seems the conflicts. Africa is a mess. It's just it just seems that we are regressing now. And United Nations means nothing anymore. World federalism is now so far away as a possibility that it's hard for me to even want to even talk about it. And not because I don't want to, because you and I are on the same page about this.
Yeah.
But if we were struggling to instill these ideas, 20, 30 years ago, boy, good luck now, man, because we're heading we're racing away in the opposite direction of world federalism and a resurgence of a liberal order. It's pretty awful. Yeah.
Well, my friend, I'm so glad that I have found you back 25 years ago, and that you have been a colleague and collaborator.
It's great. No, the fact that we're still in touch after so many years, it's wonderful. I love that we were able to connect, and you're right. We should continue to do so.
Absolutely. Well, this project, the Technoprogressive Hub podcast that you're listening to now, we will have George back, of course, to talk about other topics in the future. Thank you so much for joining us today, George.
You're very welcome. It was a joy to talk to you again.
The Technoprogressive Hub is sponsored by the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies and hosted by me, Jay Hughes. Find us at Substack at Technoprogressives.